Welcome to 265.7 Ideas for Test 2. I'd like to take a moment to develop some ideas that I think will be helpful in reviewing for Test 2. I'd like to go through the questions and some excerpts from the text that might help to better inform them. On Test 2, which is worth 100 points, you'll be asked to address in 3 parts 3 areas or concerns. The first part, worth 50 points, will ask you to frame your answers for students and parents about assessment and how you use them in your classroom. You'll be asked to look at each of 5 forms of assessment and write a paragraph describing what it is and how you intend to use it. The second part will be on how you would assess student knowledge, skills, and dispositions in an assignment that required constructing a tall tale, as you recall from the text. And the third part will ask you what dispositions you believe lead to student success, and you'll be asked to put together a questionnaire that will sample them. The first part will be worth 50 points, parts 2 and 3 will be worth 25 points each. In part A, I'll ask you to imagine that you're preparing a written handout that you're going to distribute to parents at a back-to-school night. You'll also email it to parents and post it on your classroom webpage. You're going to use this to let parents and students know how you intend to use assessment and what kinds of assessments you'll be using. Now, you're going to be able to use this text in a later assignment. So this is an attempt to just look at these 5 forms of assessment and think about what they are, how you use it, and their benefits and limitations. So I'm going to ask you to write a short single paragraph description of each of the 5 forms. 3 to 5 sentences for each of those responses will be fine. Assume that you're preparing it in a frequently asked question format, so you'll lead with the question and then answer it as makes sense for your own particular classroom and what you think about this. So the scoring has indicated what I hope to see in the answer, but what I'd like to focus on here is a little information from the text that might help to deal with the question of benefits and limitations, that being what people often find most difficult when they think about these forms of assessment. The first question will be, what is selected assessment and how will we use it in our classroom this year? Remember that Stiggins in the text clarifies in his summary in Chapter 5, we established at the beginning of the chapter that these options often are labeled objective tests because of the manner in which they are scored. When test items are carefully developed, there is only one clearly best answer. No judgment is involved. However, the teacher's professional judgment does play a major role in all other facets of this kind of assessment, from test planning to selecting material to writing the test items. For this reason, it is essential that all selected response test developers closely follow procedures for creating sound tests. So we talk about it objectively, but realize that there is a tremendous subjective element in what is selected, how it is selected, and how it's developed in the test. And so while selected response can be an excellent way to assess knowledge in other domains, it also is better thought of as being both subjective and objective than simply objective. The second question is, what is essay assessment and how will we use it in our classroom this year? Stiggins commented that we began by exploring the prominent roles subjectivity and professional judgment play in essay assessment. This method carries with it dangers of bias. We study specific ways to prevent these dangers from becoming realities. One is to connect essay assessment to appropriate kinds of achievement targets. These include mastery of complex structures of knowledge, complex reasoning processes, and some of the knowledge foundations of skill and product proficiencies. In addition, we considered an array of strategies to engage students as full partners in assessment, from design and development of exercises, to scoring, to interpreting and using essay assessment results. These strategies connect assessment to teaching and learning in ways that can maximize both students' motivation to learn and their actual achievement. So, notice that how we connect the essay item, what kind of thought processes it involves, the level of complexity of it are very important in its development. Also, how we're going to engage and involve students directly. When talking about the benefits and limitations of essays, it's heavily dependent on how we use them to actually develop student thinking and how we use them to engage students. Those might be things you'd want to think about as you try to communicate with parents. The third question is, what is performance assessment and how will we use it in our classroom this year? Again, Stiggins, in discussing this, said, clearly the heart of this chapter was our exploration of the two basic steps in developing performance assessments. Clarifying performance, dealing with the nature and focus of the achievement being assessed, and developing performance tasks, dealing with the way we elicit performance for observation and judgment. As we covered each step, we framed the possibilities available to you as a classroom teacher, establishing standards for sound performance criteria and performance tasks. In our opinion, the most practical part of the presentation in this chapter occurred when we devised 5 steps for formulating your own sound performance criteria, urging collaboration with students and other colleagues. I'd reference you back to those 5 steps that were developed in the chapter, because by understanding that there are 2 basic steps, clarifying performance and developing performance tasks, and that there's really a kind of a 5-step development process that follows that, it gives us a better idea how we can use performance assessments effectively in the classroom. And so as you review for the test, you may want to give that another look. The fourth question is, what is personal communication assessment and how will we use it in our classroom this year? Stiggins offered the following summary. When we attend to quality standards, we use our interactions with students to assess important achievement targets, including mastery of knowledge, reasoning, and dispositions. We also can assess student mastery of knowledge and reasoning prerequisites to performance skills and product development capabilities. But remember to tap the skills and products themselves. Performance assessment is required. Thus, like the other 3 modes of assessment, this one is quite flexible. Even though we typically don't refer to personal communication as assessment, if we start with a clear and appropriate vision, translated into thoughtful probes, sample performances appropriately, and attend to key sources of bias, we can generate quality information in this manner. So can students. Whether in whole class discussions, smaller collaborative groups, or working with a partner, students can be assessors too. Now, following the whole notion of assessment for learning throughout the text, we see the emphasis on personal communication as a means to both capture data in assessment and to move students forward. So as we think about the relationship between personal communication and performance assessment, we see that they're not entirely separate. And so this would be worth giving a thought to as well. So you think about, again, what are the benefits and the limitations of the particular form of assessment? How would you actually use personal communication in your classroom? How does it assess where students are and how they're ready when you think of it motivationally? The 5th question is, what is disposition assessment and how will we use it in our classroom this year? Stiggins offered the idea, our aspiration for students is that they develop positive dispositions about learning and negative dispositions about those things that interfere with it. Our assessment questions are these. Are students developing the positive attitudes, strong interests, positive motivations, positive school values, positive academic self-concept, and the can-do sense of internal locus of control needed to succeed in school and beyond? And 2, are students feeling safe in school, and are they experiencing levels of anxiety appropriate to the full productive learning, but not so high as to be debilitating? These are affective targets influencing student tendencies to behave in academically productive ways. They vary both in intensity and direction, ranging from strongly positive to strongly negative. Our assessment challenge is to track their intensity and direction. So note that we have a clear purpose for doing this. We want to make sure students have the dispositions that lead to success and not the ones that get in the way. Note the point here about what we're actually tracking is intensity and direction of those. Now, you're going to be asked later to actually do something else with this as you develop a questionnaire item. But as you think about the use of dispositional assessment and also respecting student rights and privacy, how would you explain to parents your use of those dispositions? My answer often goes something to the effect of understanding what will lead students to be successful and assessing so that we can develop that along with everything else we do, because everything else we do really is dependent on it. So those are the 5 questions you'll be asked in part 1. In each case, if you would explain what this is so a parent would understand it, explain how you intend to use it very briefly, just a sentence or two on that, and then something that indicates its benefits and limitations. I'm not asking for a sentence on benefits and a sentence on limitations. I'm just saying your answer should, that context should be in there somewhere. The idea isn't to write an essay about each of these forms. 3 to 5 sentences is fine. Remember that you are communicating with parents in this communication. Now, part B of the tests asks you to pick up something that you read, an example that was used when we were discussing assessment in the text. How would you assess student knowledge, skills, and dispositions in a student assignment that requires constructing and telling a tall tale? In the Stiggins and Chubb's text, the authors provided such an example as excerpted below. Please prepare a rubric, scoring guide, chart, or narrative explanation that indicates how you would assess student knowledge and skill and student dispositions as well. You may use items already developed in this excerpt directly or with modification, or develop items entirely your own. For the assessment of dispositions, you will need to create additional items. The product should be in the range of 1 full or half page. The most common product is a rubric that adds dispositional performance criteria. However, it need not be a rubric if you wish to do it another way. So, in looking at this, you'll remember that example 2 on pages 168 and 171 gives a second grade example of telling tall tales, in which you have an idea that it's about writing or retelling a tall tale. The task description is to develop and write a tall tale or fable, and then performance criteria are listed for handwriting or word processing, spelling, sentence structure, capital letters being needed, punctuation, and understanding. So you will be developing performance criteria for what you want students to know, what you want them to be able to do, and what dispositions you want them to have. You can certainly use what you see in front of you, what was in the text. You may well develop it in other ways. You will need to add performance criteria at least for dispositions to what you're doing. You'll also need to have some indication of how you would evaluate different levels of performance in this. One example would be the way that the rubric is developed from Stiggin's standpoint, the distinguished, proficient, apprentice, and novice levels. You could simply use that and create a chart for it, or you may wish to do it your own way or a different way. Remember that this can be developed simply as a rubric or a chart. It can be done as a narrative, but what I want to see from this is how you would assess not only knowledge and skills, but also dispositions in using this one assignment. A lot of the material's already developed there, but I'd like to see how you could put your own spin on it. The third and final part of Test 2 is simply a dispositions questionnaire. What dispositions do you believe lead to student success? How will you assess them in your students? You've already created a checklist of dispositions you believe to be valuable in the classroom. Please develop a 5-item questionnaire that you might use to assess dispositions in your own classroom next year. You may use the same format as that found in Figure 9.3 of the text excerpted below, or another that you prefer. The following excerpt from the test may be helpful, so I'm going to go into that in a second, but basically your task is to, following from all the questions and items that you developed in the problem set, is to think about what dispositions you really think are important for success in your classroom and create 5 questionnaire items. Now, there's some thoughts that may be helpful in doing that. First of all, Stiggins makes some comments about questionnaires, that questionnaires represent one of the most convenient ways of tapping important student dispositions if we can find ways to help students provide complete and honest responses. That means focusing on topics that students care about and making sure they know we will act on results in ways that benefit them. Whenever we develop a questionnaire, we strive to combine all of the ideas in a way that enlists respondents as allies, as partners in generating useful information. Information promises to help us all. Sometimes that means permitting responses to be offered anonymously to reduce the risk to respondents. Sometimes it means promising to share results or promising to act purposefully and quickly based on those results. Sometimes it just means urging them to take the questionnaire seriously, to care as we do about the value of the results for making things better for all. In any event, we try to break down the barriers between us. So we have some ideas here about selected response, so I'd refer you back to the text, particularly at page 204, for the discussion there about selected response questionnaires and their strengths and how they can do that. Note that there's a great example for you in figure 9.3 of a widely used questionnaire assessment of dispositions, and shows you that these simply done in a Likert scale going from strongly agree to strongly disagree. I'm asking that you develop 5 actual questions that you could and would use in your own classroom next year. It's a great way to get a sample of things. Next week, I'll be talking about a whole variety of other ways of approaching assessment a little bit differently from the text approach, and try to build on this idea. So hopefully these test items will be helpful in developing that. Remember, there's 3 basic areas of concern in the test. I'll put these slides up without the narration as well if you just want to take a look at those, but hopefully this will give you a little better background for what to do in test 2. I wish you well. Thank you.